So, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Long Road Back, a podcast all about talk about the hidden side of injury recovery to give athletes a voice and ultimately to support athletes going through the injury journeys and make sure that they know they are not alone. So, I want to say a big thank you to all the support on the podcast so far. It really does mean a lot to me, especially transition and having a combination of elite athletes and more human grounded stories. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me to kind of hear your feedback, and that last part is actually what we're going to really dive into today. So today I'm very, very excited to announce that I'm joined by Amelia, who's got a very interesting story. And we talking briefly before this on Instagram, just before we came on air. More than anything with Amelia's story that stands out is that selfishly and from a personal level, I can already relate so deeply to things she's talked about. And the second I let her kind of explain her journey through netball, navigating some injuries that have gone on for a prolonged period of time, touching on some things like delayed diagnosis, which I think a lot of us can deeply resonate with. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. I think already, so Amelia and I were talking off air. I had to make sure we click record because I'm sure we could have got carried away with all sorts of things. So Amelia, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I followed your Instagram for a while now, so it's a great message that you're putting out there. So yeah,
That's
happy
very kind.
to.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's amazing how I think the more I've kind of posted and the more I've kind of talked about these things, it's amazing how many of us experience the same themes. It just looks
Yeah,
slightly different. And I think whether it could be someone with an ACL, as we'll go into your meniscus, with your journey, whether it's myself who kind of lift ranks in my feet, of all places, people with back injuries, people with concussions. I think it's amazing just how many of us have the same issue. It just looks slightly differently, or maybe comes in a slightly different color and things like that. So yeah, so I think it's a little bit about your journey, Amelia. What you mentioned to me before, and I'll let you obviously explain it. Is that so netball obviously is your sport passion, and it's every been a big part of your life. And I think what stood out to me as I was reading through your journey through the recreational leagues, playing university, and kind of the injuries you sustained along the way, is A, how much netball kind of means to you, to your kind of identity, but then B, kind of how difficult it's been navigating those injuries. So I'll kind of let you explain your journey with injuries.
yeah, completely. I mean, I think netball I've played ever since I was a kid, and I think it's something, particularly in the UK, that a lot of girls have always played. Um, and it's funny, I actually started out playing rugby, which in hindsight might have been a slightly less injury prone sport in
Yeah,
comparison to what I've had now.
yeah,
But yeah, so I played pretty high level at university, and then following university, I moved to London and just joined a recreational team with some friends, and had a great time. And it was super like super easy, lighthearted. No one really took it super seriously. But then I guess, yeah, in terms of injuries, I first got injured, I think it was end of 2021. I tore my calf muscle on my right leg, and that it was weird because I was like, oh, I've sprained my ankles before, like it's fine. I've broken a few fingers here and there, like it's fine. Give it a few weeks, it'll be okay. Got it checked out at hospital, and they were just like, yeah, do a few leg like calf raises, things like that. It was they gave me a physio course, but it was
yeah,
very very short term, and they kind of were like, yeah, this is fine. And then went back to playing netball, and literally I think it was the week after I'd returned, it was I was playing a game, and my Achilles just went complete, and I just completely tore my Achilles on my other leg. So I think maybe there was some like imbalances that happened, not too sure. But that went, and that to me was I mean, that completely knocked me for six. And I can talk more in detail about it later on. But yes, I tore my Achilles. That was an injury. I mean, I knew that it was going to take a long time to recover from that. It was about 12 months recovery. And then even then, I still kind of did a staggered return back to netball. And I probably played netball for about 8 months, but still slightly hesitant, but it was just mainly getting my confidence back. And then when I was really back into it, and 8 months into that, I injured my knee. So that would have been September 2023, I think
yeah.
now. Yeah. So that was about 2.5 years ago. And as soon as I injured my knee, then I kind of knew in my gut, I was like, this doesn't feel right. But I got it checked out, and they basically said, it's a sprain. In 4 weeks, you'll be back playing netball. Obviously 4 weeks later, I was still on crutches, still unable to straighten my leg, and I was like, something's not right. So I kind of went in and out of different doctors, different physios, and they put me on the NHS. They were amazing, and I love the NHS. I think they're great. They put me on a 6 month exercise therapist course to kind of gain the strength back in my
Yeah.
knee. I did that, and then I kind of returned to a bit of netball because I was ticking all the boxes, and I was like, okay, I'll play a little bit, and I just kept having these moments of instability, and I just thought that something's not right here. Um, Managed to get an MRI, and that's where they said, so it would probably be about a year after my initial injury that I got the MRI scan, and they said, "Oh, you've torn your meniscus." I'd ripped tiny parts of the bone as well off my knee, which I didn't know you could do.
I
And
didn't
then
even know.
yeah. And they were like, yeah, there's tiny bony fragments here, and I was like, is that a bad thing? Should
Yeah,
we,
it's
should we
like
do something about that?
do explain. Yeah.
Yeah, but they said they were fine to leave as is, and then they also said in terms of my ACL, that was still intact, but it had stretched, which again I
Okay.
didn't know you could do that. So I had like a what they called a lax ACL, and they basically just advised that I just continue with strength training until I felt comfortable going back to netball. And then that kind of led me up to where I am at now, where I'm just kind of I basically was like I couldn't get back to play netball. I just didn't have the strength to do it.
Yeah.
And then I found like an ACL specialist online who was incredible and has been incredible, and I'm still with them now. And we just treated it as an ACL injury,
Yeah.
and we've just been working on that. Unfortunately, I had another fall in December, which is just one of those things that happens. And then that's where I then had the consultant see me, and at a different hospital, they did another MRI really urgently, and they were like, "Yeah, your ACL's gone."
Yeah.
And so now I'm waiting for surgery. So it's a weird kind of like it's gone on for a long time. So it's about 4.5 years of injuries, but that's kind of brought me
Yeah.
up to where I am now. And I mean, I still love netball, and I still want to get back to netball. And people always say, why don't you stop playing netball? Like, find a different sport. But I think people don't necessarily understand that netball is the sport that I enjoy doing, and
Hmm.
I feel myself when I'm playing it. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, I think well, thank you for sharing that. I think something just before I was actually going to go on to something I was going to say, I just want to touch on something you just mentioned that netball is your sport because you feel like yourself when you play it. And I think I was as you were saying that, I was thinking about rugby from my perspective. I was like, wow, it's amazing just how much certain sports mean to us. And I think one of the core issues of injury ultimately is that it robs you of that. So you've been robbed of your opportunity to play netball. And it's not just a sport for so many of us. And it does sound quite cliche. I'm sure some people can think it sounds cliche, or if you're not a sporty person normally, the idea that, oh, would you don't play the sport? Like that could be their response. And I think for so many of us, A, it can feel quite dismissive. And then B, it's like, well, more than anything, I just want to play. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think
Yeah.
one of the biggest parts of injury recovery that I'm learning is all about establishing what you can and can't do. And for netball, if that is a goal that you have and your body through recovery, through patience, and through kindness kind of to yourself, if that becomes an option, of course, go for it. If it's a slightly different circumstance where they might have a very bad back fracture, or I don't know medical, I'm just plucking these, like, okay, we have a different conversation. But I think it's really interesting what you said there. And actually, the key thing that kind of stood out to me, and actually was something we mentioned just before coming on air, was just the sheer duration of how long this has taken. Because for so many of us, there isn't just an A and a B. There isn't just a start and an end point. And what you mentioned there was it 2021, I think you mentioned, was when it began. And now we're still waiting essentially for the surgery.
Yeah.
That's what, 5 years? 5 years plus?
Maybe
Four and a
five
half, five
years.
years?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
5 years that
And
I've been experiencing these injuries.
mm,
And I think it's something that people, it's hard to see because it is that kind of narrative of, well, you look fine, you're able to walk, you're able to do this. But to me, I'm like, I've always been very active. I've always been very sporty. Like at university, I was doing all the sport, I was always wanting to do it. So particularly in the time that we're living in now, where everyone's in a run club, everyone's doing triathlons and marathons, not to say that I would be doing those, but
I
it's
know what you
it's to
mean.
have the option of being able to do that where you have always been sporty. And obviously, there's other things that can impact people, and everyone has their own stories. But for someone like me, where I'm like, something so simple as playing a netball game and I turned the wrong way, or even when I did my Achilles, I literally just took a step forwards to sprint towards the ball and it just went. And it's when
Yeah.
something as simple as that impacts your life for so many years, that's the thing that really kind of, it does take its toll after a while, and it's quite invisible to other people if they're not experiencing it.
Mm.
um,
Especially, sorry to interrupt you there, but especially from a choice you kind of didn't make. And that's something that I've
yeah,
struggled with, this idea that we didn't choose to make this choice. It's not like we
yeah,
walked away from something and are dealing with these things. And now naturally, those feelings of grief tend to come from situations that weren't chosen. But again, you mentioned that we might look fine, but it has had such a big impact on so much of our life that, well, of course, we're not going to be fine. So it'd be interesting
yeah.
to kind of hear just on that duration, how are you feeling about it now in terms of, has your maybe your mindset towards the injury changed at all? Because I can imagine I imagine you've had some
Yeah.
fluctuations in that period.
I think in terms of my mindset now, I would say I am very resilient to things, and I kind of take it head on. And I think particularly with this knee injury, I shifted my mindset massively in comparison to how I was when I did my Achilles. I think when growing up, I've sprained my ankles, I've torn I've broken my fingers like playing netball as a kid and throughout university and stuff. Very, to me, very minor things at the time. It was, a classic 4 to 6 weeks you'd be back playing sport, and that
Yeah.
would be the case. And maybe it's just because I'm getting a bit older now that, your body doesn't heal as much. But these, I think I didn't take particularly early on. The calf muscle, I didn't maybe take as seriously as I thought I needed to. And then the Achilles, that completely knocked me for six in terms of the mental impact. I had no idea how blindsided I would be by how much that would impact me. Because with that, I've always known like tearing your Achilles is a bad injury. But I think when I did it, the pain was unbearable. They gave me painkillers in the hospital, didn't touch the sides. And I think they put me in a cast for 2.5 for 2 weeks, and I had to keep it elevated for for two
Yeah.
weeks nonstop, as you can imagine. And I was living with two flatmates who were incredible during this time. They were absolutely amazing and helped me out so much. But I was then, it was kind of particularly in the UK, it was the time we were coming out of lockdown and people were starting to go out and do things again.
Yeah, I
And
can.
I was
Yeah.
home, not able to go out. And so I had those 2 weeks in a cast. Then I was also having to take blood thinners, which I don't know if you've ever had
Yeah.
to take.
I had the exact
Injections.
same. Yeah.
They were
Was that when
literally
you had
like,
to
yeah, yeah,
you
in
had
your
to like
stomach.
squeeze a bit of your skin? Yeah, yeah.
I was like,
Horrible.
okay, sure, I'll
Yeah.
do this.
Thanks for making
Um,
me address my skin folds. But
my God, it's crazy. And then I was put in a boot, and again, I was in that boot for another 10 weeks, which
yeah.
it having that amount of time, and people go, "Oh, well, you're able to walk about now," and I'm like, it knocked my confidence in terms of going outside. I think it was probably 3 or 4 weeks before I went outside, and that was when my flatmate really said to me, like, "Mina, really need to go outside and see the
Mm.
sun," and I was like, "Okay, fine." And I don't think I realized how much it would impact me not being able to do the things that I was used to. And I stopped going to watch I didn't go and watch my friends play netball. I was just like, no, I'm not having anything to do with it. Um, and so I think my mental state with the Achilles injury took its toll. And I kept saying to people, it's very situational. It's situational. I know as soon as I'm back on that netball court, I will be fine. But that was
Yeah.
still 12 months away. And I do remember going back on the court for the first time after playing netball, and I felt so much better after that
Mm.
first game. I mean, I was terrified,
Yeah.
absolutely terrified playing that game. But my team were amazing, and they're all my friends and stuff. So they were like, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I feel so much more myself now."
Yeah.
And so then when I did my knee, I knew straight away in my head, I was like, this is not a good injury. Like this is going
Mm.
to take a while to recover from. But I shifted my mindset and I said, right, let's approach it completely different. You've been through the Achilles injury. You don't want to go back to how you were there. Let's take a different approach. And that's when I set up my like Instagram account.
Yeah.
And it was me like to begin with, it was private. It was a private account. Set it up for my
Okay.
friends as a bit
Yeah.
of a joke, just to like because people would text me being like, "Oh, how are you getting on?" I'm like, "Look, I'm just going to update you all in one go
Mm. Yeah,
on the Instagram." So it was a bit of a joke to begin with, and then I thought, well, let me just make this public and see if other people have the same sort of stories, or if people will find my story interesting and maybe relate to it. So I really shifted my mindset with this one, and it's very much I talk to people about it. I'm saying, this is what my rehab is like at the moment, or I'll say, I'm not having a great time because I can't go and do this. So, or I'll say to my friends, do you want to do something different because I can't go and do that? And we'll kind of
makes a big difference.
yeah. I think just talking about it more makes such a difference.
No,
So
I
yeah,
think
it's
I,
been a big battle.
no, well, I think before I kind of touch on just briefly on that mindset shift you've had, which I think is actually what probably the key thing I really want to focus on. That what you mentioned earlier was the idea that you had the surgery and you're back at home and you weren't seeing the sun. And these are things that I know that I can relate to. I was sat on my bed right next to me here. Mum came upstairs. Mum had to bring me yogurt and oats for breakfast, and then it was middle of winter and it wasn't sunny, and yeah, no, the blood thinners and that. Social media has this habit, and this is something I've experienced of really reducing this recovery and making it look almost glamorizing recovery or the injury. And it's the idea, look, of course, I used to love some of those gym edits that were around. Of course, everyone did the motivational edits to keep going. But I've definitely seen an influx online of people getting injured. Again, our whole page isn't what we do is all about supporting these people. But then it's almost like it seems to be almost reduced to like this thing that, oh yeah, I'm injured. I'm also on crutches. Like, well, but for so many of us, again, this wasn't a choice, and this actually had an enormous impact on our lives.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it's not glamorous, and that we can post about how it looks, and we're back on the bike maybe, and we're swimming, and but social media doesn't capture those tears at 1 a.m. It doesn't capture those dark moments when you mentioned there blood thinners. Like if we don't want to go on them, like and it's painful. And I think that what I'm really grateful that you've mentioned there was that the recovery isn't pretty. Let's not say it's wrong, and it's not wrong that it's not pretty. If anything, it's actually more human that it's not pretty. But I just think social media tends to glamorize things that maybe don't quite need to be glamorized. And I think it's almost easier if we go, you know what, this is bad, it is tough. But the more we, as you mentioned there, the sense of acceptance that you had when you went, okay, this time I've done my knee, I'm going to accept this, and I'm going to kind of reframe what I can and can't do within that. Like, if you don't mind, do you want to explore it? Like, kind of, you mentioned there that you had said to your friends, "Or what can we do given my knee?" I think that's a really
Yeah.
positive flip on, rather than going, "Oh God, I can't do these things." So it's really interesting. Try and just kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just very much to begin with. A lot of people were like, "Oh, like you're injured again." Like I sent a couple of my friends photos of me of me in A&E, and they were like, "Please don't tell me you've injured yourself playing
Not
netball."
again.
Yeah, not again. And I was training with the personal trainer for a few years, and he was amazing. And he was always like, I think our sessions would always be a Tuesday, and I would always play netball the Monday night. So I'd often text him, be like, "Yeah, not making the session tomorrow because I'm injured." I think people were just, I think to begin with, people were very like, "Oh, you're injured again." But I think when I approached them and saying, "Look, yes, I'm injured again, but I'm still up for doing this and I will make it work." And I remember after my knee injury, I had tickets with my family to go to the Rugby World Cup in Lille, and I was like,
Oh,
I'm going. And
which
my
game?
parents, it was the France England game, I think. It was no, not France England. It was the England game where Owen Farrell didn't kick in time in like the group
Samoa.
stage.
That's so naughty for
So
me.
that was
Samoa.
it.
That's so naughty. Okay, yeah, go on.
And I remember thinking, like, what is he doing? But I remember
Mm,
that, like, initially, my dad was, I went with my dad, and he was like, "Are you sure you're going to be okay?" I was like, "I am going. Like, it's the Rugby World Cup. We've got tickets. We're
mm.
going." He was like, "Okay, great. Let's do this." And we just made it work. And I said, "I can make it work if, if we just maybe allow a bit of extra time." And I think the following week, I was then going to a family wedding in Morocco, and my family were like, "Are you going to be able to make it?" I was like, "Yes." I was like,
Yeah.
"I will make it. We will make it happen." They said, "Great, okay, let's figure out what we need to do." And we looked at the special assistants at an airport, which may I say
Yeah,
is
I've used them. Yeah, yeah.
it's really handy. So that was great for my family. We were very like, okay, let's crack on and do this. And then in terms of my friends, I think it was just I think what I realized is with my Achilles, I shut everyone off and I said, no, I don't want to see people. And I think I didn't communicate with them how much it was impacting me and how limited I wasn't able to do things. So I remember during my Achilles injury, I didn't really see a lot of friends that much. And, some people came around and checked in on me, but because I wasn't communicating how bad it was, I think it was partly my fault for not doing that. But they were just like, well, we had no idea how bad it
Mm.
was in terms of not being able to walk and all that stuff. So I think when I did my knee injury, I just communicated with everyone. I said, look, can you come and visit me? Can we, go somewhere that's got accessible, like, a lift or something like that, rather than
Yeah.
something different. So I think it was just the main thing was communicating, and my friends were super receptive to that. And it was just a case, yeah, communicate, let them know what your situation is, what you're capable of doing. And London, I think particularly is good in terms of being able to get around. There's a lot of assistance available if you need it. Um, but it's just having the people in your network to support you to get through that. It does make such a difference. So
Yeah, and
yeah, I
I
think that's
think,
the thing.
yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, but I think that what really stood out to me there is the two things. Firstly, that the communication. I think that one of the hardest parts of injury is genuinely just expressing how you feel because it is
Yeah,
so uniquely subjective, isn't it? So the way netball affects you is categorically different to the way netball affects someone else. And even if it was the exact same, your injury might be a tiny bit different, so the outcome is different. I think that communication is so interesting. I think it's such a valuable lesson. I think clearly you've learned there that talking to people is a positive thing. I think that's something that, like, and I think that it's so scary to open up because it is one of the most vulnerable things I've ever had to do is open up to someone about an injury, basically say, I'm really struggling here.
yeah,
But it helps so much because as you mentioned there, things that you didn't think you could do, suddenly you can do. And I think it just opens up a new world of possibilities that we kind of shut off. And I think just before, kind of moving on from this was that I think the core kind of message that I've got from what you're mentioning there was that you seem to accept your knee injury far more than the Achilles. And because I think
yeah.
one of the key things that I've learned so far is that the more I'm accepting it, the more I can process what's going on. So just quickly, I'm interested to hear that, was there a degree to which you felt more accepting and determined surrounding the injury of the knee rather than the Achilles?
Definitely, absolutely. I mean, I think when I remember, and I vividly remember this stuff. I remember falling to the ground when I did my knee, and I had a friend there, and she'd recovered from a torn ACL, and I said to her, I was like, I can't do this again. I said, I cannot do this again. I think I've done my ACL. You hear the noise, you hear all the stuff, and
You
you
know,
think, and I'm lying on the floor, and my friends do say, I think I kind of blacked out a little bit because apparently I was on the floor for a while, and I don't remember being on the floor for that long. But they said I was slightly hysterical when I fell to the floor with my knee because I was saying over and over again, I can't do this again. I can't do this again. And I think I remember my friend saying to me, yes, you can. It will be fine. We will get through this. And I think that really, in that moment, just went, right, let's just not, it's, there's no point dwelling on it. It is what it is. It's happened. This is the path that's been written for me, and I've just got to go along with it. So I thought, I knew how bad it could get, and I thought I don't want to get back to that point. So that's why I really just shifted my mindset and just thought, no, we're going to approach this differently. And it's not to say that I haven't had, you know, you know, times where I've really struggled with this, because I think the difference with this is because it's been going on for so long. It's just like a constant, like, well, this is what I've got to do, and I just focused on getting as strong as I can, and kept advocating for myself, which is a whole story in itself of the whole misdiagnosis and everything. So
mm,
it was really kind of a big mind shift of just saying, right, let's just get on with this and get as strong as we can. And our aim is still to get back to play netball. Whereas I think that Achilles, it just completely blindsided me because it was such a big injury. I didn't know anyone who'd torn their Achilles before, and at that young age, I guess I was, yeah, I can't remember how old I was, but to tear your Achilles, it's not just stepping forward. It's not something that people usually experience. And I think at the time there were a couple of rugby players that maybe done it, and I was like, oh, okay. And I think there was an Olympian who'd done it, and I was like, oh, okay. Like let me see how their recovery's going.
yeah.
now I guess on social media, everyone does seem to be getting injured. Maybe it's just my algorithm, I don't know. But I think the
I,
main thing was it was a big mind shift. Um, and yeah, that's basically it.
I think thank you for sharing that, because I think that's something so many of us people, so many of us can resonate with, and self, like from my perspective, it's something I'm learning, and that I mean, that learning to live in those spaces is everything, because
Mm,
I know that when I first did my foot, there was this idea of, okay, when I step back on that rugby field, that one moment is when I am Tom again, I am better again. But as I'm kind of going through this more and more and learning that it's not a linear process. It's not going to happen. It's not bang, we're done. It's a choice that's built up over loads of small, tiny choices again and again and again and again. That okay, in my mind, even if I can't get back to rugby, I know that I have a goal in mind that doesn't require one specific outcome. And I think obviously returning to netball court, absolutely brilliant. And I think having those goals that okay, whether you step on tomorrow, whether you stepped on in a year or 2 years, I don't think it'll be 2 years, but this idea that it's not an exact moment, exact day, I think is really, really healthy. And I think that just again, the idea that by accepting that it's not going to be linear, there are going to be those bad days. It just makes that when those bad days do come along, we can go, all right, I'm going to deal with this, manage this today, kind of get through it, but getting through it is is a positive, not a negative. And I think somebody just
absolutely.
mentioned there, as we kind of, starting to come towards the end of this session now, that the idea about social media. And I think it's something that I do touch on a lot on this channel, but I think it's something that I want to touch on more, particularly, given this episode is definitely focused on our kind of human experiences, that you're right, everyone seems to be getting injured. Like, I don't think that's
Yeah.
just your algorithm. I genuinely think that for whatever reason, the algorithm is full of people getting injured. And it's kind of what we alluded to earlier. So I'm interested to hear how have you perceived these people on social media? And then what, if any, impact did it kind of have on your recovery?
I mean, I'd say during my Achilles, I turned off Instagram. I said, I mainly kept it to, I'm a big fan of F1, so I mainly kept it just to follow F1. That's
Fair
all I
enough.
had of
Yeah,
my
yeah.
I was like, I don't want to be comparing myself to other people and, thinking about all the things that I can't do. And I think with my knee injury, I've seen a lot more people that are on my algorithm that are injured. And I think it's great, but I think people do glamorize it too much. And I think for me, particularly with this knee injury, because for so long I wasn't sure what I'd actually done to what I'd actually done to my knee. I remember I kept saying to my friends, yeah, it's not right, it's not right. Like, something's not right. And it just became quite boring. And I think the positive of people being on social media is that you see other people in your same situation and they get it. And I
Yeah.
think when I've
Spot
had conversations with people who have injured their knee, who've had big injuries like this, they understand. They completely get the feelings that you're going through, the emotions, the highs, the lows. And I think it's like a big thing as well is the commitment to going to the gym and doing your rehab. And a lot of people online are now saying, oh, rehab's, I'm having to do rehab, I'm having to do rehab. And I'm like, yeah, but that is my life. I
It's
go to the
important
gym.
language there as well, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt you, but it's important language there, isn't it? They're like, have to. It's an immediately negative framing.
Yeah. And I'm like, to me, I've just ingrained it into my training program, you know, and I do 3 lower body sessions a week and that is the rehab. But it's not to say that it's not gonna get me stronger and it's not gonna, help me. I just look at it as I look at it as rehab, but I don't call it
Hmm.
rehab. And I think
Spot
that
on.
has
I'm
helped
the same. Yeah, yeah.
because it's just that mind shift of going, okay, this is just it. I think it's weird. People say they're so motivated to go to the gym. I'm like, I'm not. I'm just consistent because I know that if I continue with this, I will be able to get back to where I want to be. And that I think is something that I've really had to learn over the past 4.5 years. And it doesn't come easy. And I remember sitting there when I did my Achilles and I was, trying to just learn to move my foot side to side, up and down. And now I'm, so much further from that. And I think the social media aspect of documenting things and seeing your progress is super, super helpful. And, it's good to kind of look back and see where you've come and where you are now. But I think people have to be careful with, yeah, the terminology, the glamorization of it, and just yeah, I think not glamorizing it too
Yeah.
much because it isn't. It's not fun, but we do it because we want to, because we want to get back to where we were. So yeah, I
Yeah,
guess
I think
that's
it's that you're just so right. There's so much good on social media, and your account's a brilliant example of that. I think that there is so much positivity on social media because more than anything, as you said, ultimately the algorithm puts you with people who get
mm,
it. And I think
yeah,
more and more, I think what I really want to try with this idea of social media, because it's so easy for me and so easy for you to come on here and kind of bash social media. And I will do that when I think it needs to be called out, and you'll do the same as you just alluded to. But I think we can't change that. There's always it's going to be there. So I'm thinking now. I think I'm so glad you alluded to it. This idea that okay, if there is so much negativity and superficialness, if that's a word, or fabrication of things, and reducing a 3-year recovery to 3 seconds. How can we then create these positive platforms like the one you mentioned there yourself? That it's so good to document your recovery because then you have that sense of progress on those bad days. You then go, oh, okay, before I did that. And I think that I know I've come into contact with people who've had list frank fracture, which is really quite an unknown thing. But then,
that was
but those
quite
who
rare.
know. And it's had this idea
Yeah,
that as soon as you speak to someone about it, they're like, okay, we get it. And I think
yeah,
that the more we can kind of push, address the negativity, but also provide a space to, talk about these positive things. I think it's so important. I just had a notification on Zoom, so we've only got 3 minutes left. So just to kind of come to the end, yeah, I know and it was flashing in the top corner. Just kind of coming to the end here. Is there? I mean, you've alluded to it brilliantly across the kind of interview, but is there something? What's if you could go back to that very first day in 2021? What lesson or what would you kind of tell yourself? Is just sitting on that MRI table, or sitting there just got injured on the floor. What's the one thing you maybe try and pass down to yourself?
I think I think if I could go back in time, I would, and somehow give myself more mental resilience. I think I would do that because I think I would say to myself, be prepared, and it's okay to tell people that you're struggling, because I think that is the hardest challenge with an injury like this. I think the physical side, the physical rehab, you can do that. You can go to your gym and you can do it, but the mental side of it is the biggest challenge, and that knocked me for six, and it took me by surprise. And that's what I really tried to change when I injured my knee. So that is something that I'd go back in time and tell myself to really really focus on, and you know don't shy away from it, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. So
completely.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just I think that's so. I think honestly, it's such a human feeling. That idea that it's almost the idea that it's going to be okay, and it's like this idea that we don't have to rush it, we don't have to push through it. It's the idea that like just mental resilience there. That okay, it's going to be bad. We know it's going to be bad. The more we can kind of not let ourselves get distracted by these other things, learn to live in those moments, like you kind of mentioned there, that it becomes so much easier. And I'm so glad you said that because I know for me, if I could go back to myself, whichever time that is, whether it's for my foot, let's say here, that I just wish I could go, okay, take the right steps, speak to the right
Yeah.
people, as you mentioned earlier, and then just it's going to be okay. Because that's something that,
Mhm.
losing sight of that end goal, whatever that end goal may look like, I do think it's actually one of the hardest things to deal with, especially when it gets tough. So yeah, I hope you don't mind. So kind of pause there, but yeah, thank you so much. Honestly, I think as I was listening to you there, it's amazing how much I can personally relate to your experiences, even though we've had completely different injuries. Well, they're pretty close in proximity, in all fairness, on the foot and the knee. But yeah, I think it's amazing how, as we kind of alluded to just before we came on, that they may be so different, but those themes are so similar. And I think I speak for a lot of people, and I'm sure some of the listeners will say the same, that they would, I could feel myself really relating to the story, in those completely different. So thank you so much. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed that, and I hope everyone has a nice day.